Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to this new episode of the Releasing the Real You show. I'm really excited that I have Georgina Hickman with me. Georgina is a BANT registered nutritional therapist, and we're going to have a lovely chat. We're going to, as usual, talk about our health, being gluten-free, and what we need to think of or not think of, what we can do to improve our situation. So, warm welcome, Georgina.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what you do, who you are, and also how did you get to become a nutritionist?
Okay, so what I do is I help busy professional women who are struggling with gut and hormone health issues to regain their health and well-being and live their lives free from debilitating symptoms. So they can get back to being how they used to be, if you like.
Mhm.
And then the way I got to be a nutritional therapist is, well, it's a bit of a roundabout way, to be honest with you. Um,
Always interesting, by the way.
oh, it took me quite a long time to get here, but I started off actually doing a biomedical science degree when I first went to university. So it's always been something that really fascinated me, the human body. And I did actually apply for medical school. I didn't actually get in. So at that point, I became an accountant, and I stayed as an accountant for 15 years.
Okay.
And then 7 years ago, I retrained and did a second degree, became a nutritional therapist. But the thing is, I suppose I've gone 360, but sometimes when you look back on things, you realize they're probably meant to be. So when I was growing up, my dad actually had an autoimmune condition, still does, I suppose. He was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, and told that he would inevitably become a cripple, and that his spine would all fuse together, and there wasn't anything he can do about it. But he sort of took matters into his own hands, worked with a functional medicine doctor, changed his diet and lifestyle, and is now 70 years old, fully active, fully able, very active actually. And I guess, when you sort of grow up with things like that, you think differently from other people, and you don't necessarily just take what conventional medicine says as a given. I suppose my beliefs are to explore, to identify root causes, and that you have the power to change your outcomes. So what I do now fits far better with what I believe than having gone into conventional medicine would have.
Okay. That's very, very interesting for sure. And I think when you have a supposedly final diagnosis or
Mm,
something, that someone says you can never recover from it or you're gonna become X, Y, Z, that
mm.
really makes you look at, okay, what can I do
Yeah,
to,
exactly.
to be as good as I can be?
Exactly.
Might not fully recover, but at least,
Hmm.
be the best you can be, definitely. And you mentioned you specialize in gut health.
Yes.
Now, obviously, we know that celiac disease is a autoimmune disease as well that
Yes.
affects our gut. So, how do you feel the gut is affected related to celiac disease? Obviously, we know that when we ingest, someone with celiac disease, when we ingest
Mm.
gluten, our villi get flattened and we don't absorb food or the nutrients from the food properly. But other than that, how do you feel the gut gets affected? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
sorry, you broke up a little bit there, but I
Okay.
think I got the gist of it.
Yeah. So obviously we know,
I think
the
I got the
things the
gist of
gut,
it.
but what other things do you feel that
Yeah.
how is the gut affected otherwise?
Yeah, okay. So obviously, like you say, the main way it's compromised is by its inability to fully absorb nutrients from the diet, which is obviously a very important, essential function of the gut. But there are other things we just don't pay as much attention to that are still really important. And I think it's important to remember that the gut lining is only one cell thick, and it's got a very difficult charge here because it's tasked with absorbing what we need from our food at the same time as keeping out anything that's potentially harmful. Um, but when there's gut inflammation, such as what happens with celiac disease, then the gut lining, as you say, gets damaged, and then holes can appear in this lining. And what happens then is the immune cells that are sitting just outside of the gut lining can then see these foreign particles, such as bits of food, and they will then raise an immune reaction to that. And so otherwise harmless substances, such as the chicken that you might have had for dinner last night, can suddenly become something that you can become sensitive to. And obviously in celiac disease, the cells are triggered by gluten, but they can also be triggered by other foods. So anything that has a similar protein structure to gluten, for example, could raise a response. So something like dairy or grains, for instance. And as nutritional therapists, what we do is we help people with compromised gut linings to repair their guts. And we do that by taking out the inflammatory foods, the trigger foods, but at the same time, we give you what you need to be able to help heal your gut lining. And also, if necessary, we'll also work on rebalancing what's called the gut microbiome. So they are other ways that the gut is affected by celiac disease we don't think about as much.
So is there any tests that we can ask the GP? I know you deal with testing yourself, but before
Yes.
we get to you, is there any tests that we can ask the GP to already do? Once you're diagnosed with celiac disease, you know you got it, you got diagnosed by a specialist, but what other tests could we ask the GP to do that will help you see or a starting point to see that there's more work to be done than just eliminating gluten?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I guess the main tests that I would be asking the GP for, if they hadn't already done them, are your tests for nutrient deficiencies. So, because we know there's likely to be quite a few. So, particularly, I'd be wanting to see what your levels of B12, folate, iron, magnesium, vitamin D, and zinc they might test as well. And then if deficiencies were found, we could give you the correct supplementation, which would hopefully be short term, but it would give you a helping hand whilst you didn't have those nutrients. And whilst we're working on restoring proper gut function. So, as a temporary measure, supplements can be very effective here. The other thing I would be interested in getting a GP to do, if they were amenable to it, would be to screen for other common autoimmune diseases. And this is because we know that when you have one autoimmune disease, it puts you at greater risk of having others. So the main autoimmune conditions that I see in practice are Hashimoto's, so autoimmune thyroid disease, and also type 1 diabetes. So it might be, if you've got a helpful GP, that they would be willing to help you look into some of those things.
Yeah. I know, just as I was getting diagnosed, all the things that you mentioned, except for zinc, which was not tested, was came up back in red. So quite scary to see that on a test result, PDF. But yes, definitely everything was deficient. So okay.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised you didn't have a zinc test. I think they're quite expensive and they're not routine.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, so as I said, I've never seen a zinc test on any of my GP blood tests. So that's great. So going gluten-free, we know that it obviously eliminates a lot of the inflammation caused by celiac disease and gluten attacking the gut. And with time, the body starts absorbing nutrients again. The villi will recover, which is a good thing. I remember my specialist saying to me, the good thing is there's no medication for, it's not that you just pop a pill and, you automatically get sorted, but by eating well, and by being careful, you will fully
Mm.
recover. But what else? And you already mentioned some supplements. What other things could we do to, heal our gut faster,
Yeah.
or better? What would you suggest food-wise? Is there anything we need to think of, or?
Yeah, of course. There's plenty we can do. So as you mentioned already, like the supplementation short term is very effective. It's important to realize that those nutrients that you're missing, they do lots of jobs around the whole body. So they're needed for like energy production, detoxification, proper immune function. So if you're lacking some of those things, you're probably not going to feel very well. So the best way you're going to feel faster, better is to supplement short term.
So, quick question on that one, because it's
Yeah,
something I'm curious about. If my villi are affected to start with, do you
yeah.
still absorb the supplements? Because obviously you don't absorb the nutrients from food, but would you
Yeah, so I
absorb
think it can be harder, and sometimes it's best to do more like sublingual nutrients or even topical magnesium, for instance, would be effective here.
that?
But yeah, often we might think about sprays or liquids, they might be more effective. Yeah.
Okay. That was I remember when I got diagnosed, my GP said to me, "Oh, you should take da 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 da." Da." I'm like, "Well, if I'm not going to absorb it, what's the point?" But yeah, you just answered the question. So that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and
Any
then there's
foods?
like plenty of therapeutic foods. I was just going to go into that. So, when I talk about healing the gut lining, we do this with food, and there's common foods that provide the nutrients we need to be able to repair the gut lining. And the key nutrients we're looking for are zinc, vitamin A, vitamin D. Probiotics is also really effective here, and omega-3. So we can get a lot of those things from food. Some really good foods for this sort of thing are fatty fish, which are really high in omega-3. So what I mean by that is things like salmon, mackerel, anchovies,
Sardine.
sardines, that sort of thing. So all of those fatty
So
fish are
not the typical
brilliant.
fish and chips that you would have. I'm joking.
No, no, no. Small fish is what we're looking for here. Those oily fish. And then there are other things that are quite useful. As I mentioned, zinc. So things that are high in zinc are things like prawns or meat generally, and some nuts. But also, obviously, vitamin D is difficult to get from food. So we usually have to get that in a supplement form because there's not a lot of foods that are very high in vitamin D. But the others we can generally get from food. So probiotics, you could look into things like sauerkraut or if you can tolerate it, Greek yogurt with live cultures, etc. But things that I often ask people to do are bone broth. Now, bone broth is very restorative for the gut lining, and you can make your own. You can get bones from the butchers and do your own bone broth at home, and it's not difficult, and it takes a bit of time, obviously, but it's a really good therapeutic food. And just getting into the habit of having a cup of bone broth a day, or adding bone broth to soups and stews and things like that. Otherwise, collagen powder does a similar job if you don't want to do the work. But bone broth, I think, is better.
Yeah.
And then, so they're the sort of therapeutic foods we'd be adding in the first instance, to be honest with you.
What do
And
you
then,
do if someone is vegetarian? Because you mentioned a lot
um,
of fish, bone broth, what?
yeah. So I guess more difficult, actually, really a lot more difficult. In that case, I would probably be more reliant on supplements. Obviously, you can get some omega-3 from nuts and seeds. So hemp seeds, flax seeds are quite good. Chia seeds, walnuts. So it's not like these things don't come in a vegetarian form, but they often aren't as bioavailable.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other thing I would be interested in doing with somebody who's got celiac disease is, as I sort of alluded to earlier, doing what we call an elimination diet. And this would help us to identify any other food intolerances, which could still be causing ongoing inflammation, even if you take out gluten. So elimination diets, what they tend to do is take out food groups for a little bit of time and then reintroduce them one at a time to see if you react. And that's what we consider to be the gold standard, really, in terms of identifying food intolerances and sensitivities.
Any specific foods you would start with? I suspect dairy, because
Yes,
dairy is the reaction is the same spot where it reacts to gluten. So,
that's right. Yeah, so I'd start with there's about 6 really common food intolerances. Gluten and dairy are the big ones. So yes, start with those. But
mhm.
also corn, soy, eggs, and peanuts would be the next ones I would take out. And then reintroduce them one at a time, like I said. There are
Interesting,
other
because
things,
so much food, especially if you don't do, you don't prepare stuff
yeah, yourself.
yourself, to put at
Mm,
least soy in, because it makes things so much cheaper.
yeah,
So,
yeah, correct.
tricky, tricky.
Yes. So another reason why someone should work with yourself and know exactly what's going into their food.
Yes, definitely. That's for sure. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's true though, when I look at things, in the shop and you read food
Mm,
labels, you
yeah.
suddenly realize how much stuff they add to. I'm not even talking about the ultra processed gluten-free food.
Mm,
Even the thing that is not, that's gluten-free, supposedly
mm,
naturally, that's been processed. The amount of soy that I see in things is massive.
yeah, right.
No.
And it's also worth saying that things that cause a lot of inflammation and would take it would then take longer for the gut to heal are alcohol and sugar. So going low sugar, low alcohol would be really effective in this situation.
Oh, that's interesting. And again, alcohol aside,
Mm,
most of the gluten-free products that are out there are full of
yes.
sugar. I know even from, baking, I see that most gluten-free bread recipes have sugar in it because it allows the bread to brown nicer, which otherwise it looks a bit paler. And
Yeah.
that's because the gluten-free
Yeah.
don't brown as much as the gluten, the wheat or something else. So there is a lot of
Yeah.
sugar in gluten-free foods that are out there. So very interesting.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel that anyone that's been diagnosed, I mean, as a rule, let's say, and it doesn't always happen, when you get diagnosed with celiac disease, you are at some point referred to a dietitian at
Right.
NHS.
Yeah.
Doesn't always happen. It sometimes happens 6 months later or 8 months later because there's a waiting
Mm.
list. And generally, from my understanding, from what I see with people I talk to, by the time they get to it, they probably know more than what the, dietitian is helping with. Um,
Okay.
do you feel that anyone or everyone that is diagnosed with celiac disease should work with a nutritionist?
So I think certainly in most circumstances it's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
I'd say that the person who should not work with a nutritional therapist is a person who's not interested in the reason why it's happening and is happy to just stick to those gluten-free processed products as a solution.
Mhm.
That would be the person who would not benefit from working with someone like myself. But if someone came to me with celiac disease, what I'd want to do is run a comprehensive blood panel. So we'd look at not just the nutrient deficiencies, but other parameters of health. So we'd really be looking to see what's your status now that you've had this disease. How's your body coping? What are your vital organ function? What's it like? And then obviously a gut test would be really helpful here too, because we already know it's compromised in some way. And if we do a comprehensive gut panel, it would look at things like things that will never be tested in conventional medicine, I'll be honest.
Mhm.
But things like gut immunity, obviously inflammation, but your digestive enzyme capacity, is that also compromised? Have you got signs of intestinal permeability? That's the little holes that have appeared, you know. Is there actually blood in the stool? We'd look at all of that as well as seeing how has this affected your microbiome as a whole, and is there work to be done? Or actually, you know, we know in some cases celiac disease is triggered by an infection. Is there an underlying gut infection that is part of the picture? So, you know, this is the sort of thing I'd be wanting to look at with people. And I think this is really beneficial to know this stuff, to understand more than just you're reacting to gluten, but you know, a little bit about maybe why this has happened to you, and also, you know, empowers you to do something about it. When I run these tests, what it means is that at the end of the day, you'll get better quicker because you'll be making targeted, specific,
Yeah.
personalized interventions that work for you. And a lot of the information out there is very generic. And then if you wanted to do it yourself, obviously that's better than not doing anything at all, but it's very trial and error sometimes. So working with an expert who can help guide you through the process and sort of handhold you through it is a really useful thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of people who obviously, once they get the hang of things, of, you know, oh my God, I need to change my lifestyle,
Mm,
um, they get better, but not fully better.
okay.
Because obviously, you know, going on a gluten-free diet reduces or eliminates a lot of the symptoms that people have,
Mm,
but there's still quite often something that's not going away, um,
yeah.
or not getting fully better, or you don't get back to what you used to, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, if you do a little bit too much, for instance, you're still exhausted, even though on a daily basis you're fine. But
Mm,
when, you know, you got a massively busy week, for instance, you still get exhausted. So there's lots of things that go away, but not everything. And that's probably why, you know, going through the root cause, or looking at other things
yeah,
than just the gluten, might be very, very helpful.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you already mentioned to you know, obviously do some testing and look at further causes of not being well, but what would be your top three tips? And you mentioned elimination diet. Top three tips for
Yeah.
anyone that's been diagnosed with celiac disease. So, um,
Well, actually, I guess the first thing would be kind of what you were saying, actually, is avoid gluten, but also avoid gluten-free products
okay,
because they're gonna, you know, potentially be triggering, as we've talked about, but also contain lots of sugar, lots of processed chemicals that the gut isn't going to react well to. So overall, they're not really the answer. So we think they are, but they're not.
yeah,
So actually working with someone like you to figure out and go through how you can integrate gluten-free into your life, and you know what alternatives can you make? They don't have to be exactly the same as bread. You know, in fact, what I usually say to people, if something tastes exactly like it should, but it's not, it's probably going to have lots of rubbish in it.
my
So,
gluten-free sourdough is really tasty.
oh yes, I'm
No,
sure it is.
I'm joking, but when you know, people come to me for a party, or for
Mm,
dinner, and you know, they eat my gluten-free bread, they say, well, if I had to eat that all the time, it's probably much nicer than, you know, normal
oh
supermarket.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
um,
Yeah,
yeah, but obviously I only use good ingredients in it. I do not use
yeah,
anything that shouldn't be in bread. So no,
exactly. Yeah.
no sugar either.
Yeah, so it should be like that. So yeah, that would be my top tip really.
Yeah.
And then I'd do some of the investigative work. So yes, an elimination diet probably would be in there. Because like you alluded to yourself, people can get partly better but not fully better. Is that because they're still reacting to something, then the gut's not fully healing? You
Yeah.
would only know by doing this test, and it's something you can do yourself at home. It's our gold standard really for identifying food intolerances.
Mhm.
And if you're interested in that, just Google elimination diet, and I would have thought you'll get really good advice online about it
Yeah.
and a good process for people to go through. And then I would consider working with like a nutritional therapist to do the extra panels, the extra testing. So, like the comprehensive bloods, so you understand exactly what's going on in your body, and doing the gut testing as well. So, you know, if you did that, you'd know, is there any microbiome imbalances? What do I need to do to get better? So they're the sort of things that I would do. But I guess it's just looking a bit deeper, isn't it?
It
Mostly.
it definitely is. I mean, I know, when you look at blood tests from my GP, for instance, and my GP is
Mm,
great. She does a full panel except for the zinc. But the NHS range is so wide
yeah,
that
that's right.
you might be within the NHS, bracket,
Yeah,
but it's obviously not optimal, and then you can still feel awful or not great. But as long as it's within, the norm, it's they don't do anything about it. It's the same when, for instance, you can be in the norm for iron, for instance, but if you want to go and donate blood, uh,
yeah,
you need to be much more than the
yeah,
bottom bit of that norm. Otherwise, you can't donate blood. So
yeah,
it's a bit the same that, being on the size of the bracket is quite often not
yeah.
good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of what I will do with people actually, is because we won't look at the normal range. We'll look at what we call an optimal range, which is a much narrower range,
Mhm.
and really we want as many things as possible to be in the optimal range. So I'll help people interpret the blood test in that way, and then when things are falling outside of optimal, we'll know there needs to be work done there.
Yeah. hmm
Yeah.
That sounds great. So where can people get hold of you? Obviously, your details will be in the notes
Okay.
of the episode, but is it email? Is it website? Social media? What's the best way to get hold of you?
Oh yeah, so well, what I say is if you want more information and you want to know a bit more about me, a bit more about my processes and how I work with people, then the best place to go to would be my website. So www.newmindsetnutrition.com. But if you wanted to book a discovery call with me, which is what I suggest, you know, if you're interested, then do follow. There's links on my website. There's links through um, Instagram and things like that as well. But the first and best thing you could do is book a discovery call. So it's a free 30-minute call with me, and it enables us to sort of talk through your case and discuss how I would help you. And if that sounds good to you, we can go ahead. But there's absolutely no obligation from that call. It's just an exploratory call, so you've got absolutely nothing to lose. And I think that would be the best way for people to find out more, really. And if you wanted to follow me, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and also LinkedIn. And my handle is Georgina Hickman NT. So that would be the ways you could find out more.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, Georgina. That was
Thank you,
really
Anne.
enlightening, and I think we can all learn from it, myself included. So yeah, going sugar-free or low sugar. That's
Pleasure.
I'm not a big drinker, but definitely can think of, in
Mm,
general to look at reducing sugar. So yeah, let's see how that goes. So thank you
excellent.
very much. And to everyone watching, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, do so now. And I'm looking forward to seeing you for the next episode very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.